Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Art of Storytelling. My name is Scott Brown. I am the Program Quality Director here in District 11 of Toastmasters, covering the state of Indiana and Northern Kentucky, namely Louisville. We are gathered here tonight to talk about storytelling, and in particular, how to use storytelling to help galvanize the head, the heart, and the hands of those in your tribe, in your group, in your family, in your organization. So, why storytelling? Why invest an evening in storytelling? Well, very simply, most people don't make decisions based upon logic. They make decisions based upon emotion. And storytelling is a wonderful way of not just conveying a message, but doing so in a way that's emotional, that draws others in to what happened within our individual lives and gives them hope and purpose for their journey. Since we since humans first gathered around the fire in caves centuries ago, humans have used storytelling to help make sense of the world. We've used it to help make sense of the danger that was in the world, to help protect others, to help give meaning to what was happening within our own experiences. We've used stories to educate, we've used stories to fascinate, we use stories to illuminate. And without stories, we wouldn't be able to be bonded together in the way that we are. We share stories. We share a common experience, and stories help us delve into those experiences. We know that this past year as Toastmasters has been anything but ordinary. And I would say it's been extraordinary, but I'm not sure that that's the right superlative to use. It's definitely been different. It has been fascinating, but it's been different. And how we make sense of what happened this past year will largely define what we do for coming years. Our ability to tell stories in a way that galvanizes the spirit and the energy of those around us, of our members, of our officers, of our clubs, it's going to largely dictate how successful we are as not just as a district, but also as a Toastmasters community. So tonight we are gathered around the campfire, well, maybe just in our living rooms or offices under a single light, to share how to tell stories a little bit more effectively, why to tell stories a little bit more effectively, and to help you uncover the stories that you may not even realize that you have and that your followers are begging to hear. Now, one of the things that I hear most when I start talking about stories is, but Scott, I'm boring. I don't have stories to tell. And to that, I say, phooey. We all have stories to tell, even if those stories are just about our Toastmasters experience. My Toastmasters experience started in 2012 on a beautiful May morning in Orlando, Florida. I remember driving that morning to a group that I had found on Meetup and be completely unprepared for what I might experience. I knew they were called the Articulators of Altamont, and they were part of a group called Toastmasters. I had no idea what a Toastmaster was, what a Toastmaster did, or what I might experience, but I did know two things in particular. One, they met at a restaurant. So the worst thing that was going to happen is I was going to breakfast and I'd end up eating by myself. The second thing, the second thing wasn't something I really knew, but something I hoped. If it was a group called Toastmasters, I had a feeling that there were going to be either mimosas or Bloody Marys. And at that point in my life, I was completely in for any kind of alcohol for breakfast. Well, as you can imagine, I was disappointed when I realized that it was a speaking club and not a drinking club. But what I found there, even though we lacked connection over Bloody Marys, was there was this innate ability to connect as individuals. There was this wisdom that was shared from longer term Toastmasters. There was a motivation and an inspiration that drew me in the hopes of maybe finding something that I was looking for that I didn't even know that I was searching for at the time. Toastmasters, in many ways, saved me. In many ways, it changed me. And in many ways, it helped define a new future, a future that I could have never imagined before I walked into breakfast on that beautiful May morning in 2012. I remember walking through these swinging glass doors, and as I walked in, this gentleman in a wheelchair on the right-hand side, and his wife came to me with this giant smile and welcomed me. Welcome to the Articulators. We are so glad you're here. My name is Denny. My name is Denise, and we couldn't be happier you're here. Who are you, and how did you find us? From that first interaction, I felt drawn in. I felt welcomed. It felt like I was supposed to be there. As we went through the meeting, a gentleman named Jeremy sat beside me, and you can see him in the picture here, sitting right next to me on the floor, while Aaliyah makes rabbit ears on the back of his head. And he sat beside me all meeting and explained to me why there was a bell, why they clapped incessantly for everything, what the ballots were for, what the roles were, why they did what they did. And by the time that I got called on for a table topic, I was pretty hooked. That group, the Articulators, they helped me find my voice. They helped me uncover a possibility that I didn't even know was present. And they helped me uncover a passion that I never knew rested within inside of me. I wouldn't be the person I am today without this group that I spent every Thursday morning with for about 7 years. They didn't just become my Toastmasters family, they became my family. Family. It's those people whom you're bonded to, even though you're not bonded by blood, but you would do things for that you wouldn't do even for some of those folks with whom you are bonded by blood. They drew me in and they gave me purpose. My Toastmaster story starts in Altamont Springs, Florida, with them. And in every chapter of my story after that, they are always characters in wherever I go. All of us have a story to tell. It's just that not all of us know what that story is. Our lives are comprised of chapters, of stories, of stops and starts, of wins and losses that, when taken together, help us explain who we are, why we matter, where we're going, where we've been, and what we hope for the future. Our stories are complicated. They're entertaining, they are fascinating, and they are individualized to us and to us alone. The stories that we tell are individual. You can't buy them from somebody else. You can't copy them from somebody else. They rest deep within you. And we find them in a couple of very unique ways. The first is we listen to the stories that we tell to our friends and family on a repeated basis. Those go-to stories that you tell at every picnic and every holiday and every social gathering, the ones that everybody gets drawn into, even though you've heard 1,000 times. That's part of the story of your life. This past year has given us a pause within the lives that we led to create a new chapter, a new verse within our stories that we can define what we learned in a time that, it seemed like the earth stood still. How did we cope with quarantine? What did we learn from social distancing? What did we learn from being socially isolated at times? How did we learn to talk to a little white dot instead of to a group of people in front of us? What did we learn from going online to do things other than look for sports scores or recipes? This past year has given us a ton of stories to tell if we're just willing to dig a little bit deeper to find them. Our stories are different for every one of us. Some of them are humorous, some of them are less humorous, they're more tragic than comedy. Some of them are poignant, some of them are silly, and some of them are just plain fun to tell, even if it's just for our own sake. Stories connect us. And even if the person listening to our story can't necessarily connect with exactly what it is that we did or what it is that we're telling, by sharing a piece of us, we're sharing ourselves. We're building a relationship. Because what stories do is they educate others to help them understand that they're not alone within their journey. And maybe your story taps into something that they've been thinking about, they've been worrying about, they don't understand, or they're frustrated with. And it shows them that it's okay to have the emotions that they have and to share the story that they want to share. Stories aren't necessarily planned when they come up, but the more that we tell them and retell them, the better they get. Our stories are woven into the fabrics of our lives. And the great thing with looking at your life through the lens of a storyteller is that you realize you always have the opportunity to turn the page, to close one chapter and open another, start anew. Every story can begin with a fresh start. And with that fresh start can also end a painful chapter. I know I am so looking forward to getting back into touch with physically, with groups, with people. I miss hugging people. I'm a hugger, kind of like Mr. Deeds. I'm a hugger. I can't wait to be able to connect with somebody on that physical level again. Can't wait to shake someone's hand again. I can't wait to be able to smell the presence of a meeting room. I can't wait to be able to physically connect, to understand the aura and the energy of that person because we're in the same space and we're building off of each other. It's just not the same on Zoom. It's the best that we have right now. So there are stories we can tell and stories that come to life through this medium. But it's not always the ones that we thought we were going to have. Every story that we have in our repertoire has been written by someone else, but it's been refined by us. You see, our lives aren't so unique, but the lessons that we learn within our lives are very unique. And when I first moved from Florida to Indiana, I had no intention of running for a district office, but I saw at the time that maybe I could help. Maybe I could help those around me have a little bit more of a fulfilling experience. So part of my story became moving away from what Toastmasters was to me and moving towards what Toastmasters could be for me. I learned along the way that as I helped rewrite my story and tell my story, that the characters within my story, those folks that I was surrounded with on a regular basis, as I invested in developing them, they were also invested in developing me. And maybe it wasn't so innately communicated that I'm going to help you and you're going to help me, that there was none of that dialogue, but it was understood. And as I helped somebody else take that next step to find what it was they were going to do, somewhere along the line, I learned a little bit more about me and I figured out what my next step was going to be within my life. What about you? Who are the Toastmasters? Who are the people in your lives with whom you have invested your time, your energy, your talents, your skills, your strengths, the blood, sweat, and tears of investment? Whom are those people with whom you provided that to? How's it benefited them? I bet if you ask those individuals with whom you have invested the most, they'll tell you that their lives are forever changed because of your support, your generosity, your investment. And if you think about it, your life is probably changed by investing the best of what you had into them, because we all learn a little bit more when we teach than when we do. Storytelling helps us teach as opposed to just do. It helps us find a new way to communicate. It helps us connect with people on a more personal level. It helps us develop reciprocal relationships where I do something for you and you do something for me, not because we have to, but because we're drawn to, because there's something in the energy that makes us want to connect and continue walking side by side with each other as we turn the page in our stories and move on to that next chapter, whatever that might be. I'm so thankful for those folks that have been in my story, and I'm so looking forward to the folks that will be in the next chapter of the story. So there are certain types of stories that we tell. If you think about storytelling, there are always just specific types of stories that we tell. There are stories that we tell that are about a conquest, stories that we get to the top of a mountain. How did we get there? What did we overcome in order to get there? We tell stories about winning. And they can be incredibly inspirational stories, not just in the destination when we stood at the top of the mountain, but also in all of the trolls that we overcame in order to get to the top of the mountain. If you're a fan of literature, you know that every great conquest story is filled with adversity. And it's the journey that makes the story possible. The conquest is the end result, but it's not necessarily the learning part. So within the conquest story, the journey matters so much. It seems very similar to life, where if we're always thinking about the next destination, we forget about the journey we're on and the lessons we learn at every single step. Learning to tell stories of conquest enable us to tell stories about the moments in our life where we learn things along the way to a destination. Second kind of story that we tell are the stories where we turn the page, where we have some story going. We realize this is not helpful. I do not want to keep telling this story. I need to turn the page to a new chapter in my life, where you close something that's not working and you open something new. Or maybe you close something within a location and you open something in a new area. You know that I'm not originally from Indiana. I'm not a native Hoosier. I'm actually a native Pennsylvanian. I grew up and was raised in Pittsburgh. I didn't move to Florida until I was 30 years old. So I have a story that at some point the chapter ended in March of 1998 when my wife and I packed up and moved from Pittsburgh to Orlando, Florida for the first time. And we've closed that chapter multiple times in Florida, where we've left Orlando and went to South Florida and to California and back to Orlando and back to South Florida and back to Orlando and then finally to Indiana. Each one of those moves, we turned the page into a new experience and allowed ourselves to learn from what happened in the past, but not get stuck in what happened in the past. We allowed us to bring forth those lessons that were helpful to us, but leave behind those lessons that may be holding us back in a previous chapter. So turning the page stories are all about rebirth. Like the phoenix rising from the ashes, when you tell a story about turning the page, it helps your listeners let go of what was and adapt to what can be. Third type of story that we tell a lot are the altruistic stories, where we tell stories about helping other people, where there's nothing necessarily in it for us, but it's something that we're doing to help the many. Stories of altruism are all about investing in the growth, the health, and the welfare of other individuals. Sometimes it comes at a cost to us. Sometimes it's just an investment in others. Altruistic stories often paint us in a light of learning from other individuals, where we don't have all of the questions, let alone all the answers, but we know that if we invest, we're going to grow. Religion has a lot to do with altruistic stories. It doesn't matter what religion you tend to follow. All religions are formed on the basis of sharing some sort of altruistic goal, altruistic story, so that followers are following a similar path. It doesn't have to be a religious story, but altruistic stories all have that ability to guide us emotionally towards somewhere for the greater good of the many instead of the few. And then you also have those stories that are equal parts tragedy and comedy. When you turn a tragedy upside down, you tend to get a comedy. When you turn a comedy upside down, you tend to get the tragedy. Because you need to experience the dark in order to appreciate the light. If all you ever see is the sun shining, you never appreciate the value of that light unless you also learn to appreciate the value of the dark. I personally didn't necessarily appreciate the warm summer days of Orlando, Florida, of sitting on my back deck as the summer breeze blew through my hair on a daily basis. That soft, gentle Florida breeze that just made sweet tea taste a little bit sweeter, it made the birds chirp just a little bit sweeter, it made the flowers smell just a little bit sweeter. I didn't appreciate that until I had re-experienced snow. So in every comedy, there's a tragedy. In every tragedy, there's a comedy. In every win, there's a loss. In every adventure, there's a struggle. So stories take a number of different forms, but they are all geared towards sharing some sort of an experience, an emotion, to draw others in, to help others connect in a way that helps them move forward. There's also, when you look at how we tell stories, sometimes we tell stories based upon quicksand, where we tell the stories based upon how we're solving something, how we're saving somebody from something. Quicksand stories are those stories where we're the ones that have fallen into a quicksand. We reach out for help and we look to others for guidance and for assistance. Founder stories are those stories that we tell from the point of view of why was something started. We all tell stories in Toastmasters about the beginnings of a Toastmasters club. We all tell stories about the beginning of Toastmasters 100 years ago. We all tell stories about the founding of our value system, whatever that might be. If you're in an organization outside of Toastmasters, founder stories, like the stories told by Jeff Bezos and Ingvar Kamprad and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, draw you into the organization to keep you connected to that organization. Our founder stories of how we became a club, of how we became a Toastmasters organization, of how we became a district, keep us connected to each other. We also tell stories based on alignment, where we're aligning what we do with what we say, what we value, aligning our words, our actions, our expectations, and our aspirations. When all of those are aligned, the stories that we tell guide people towards a journey. They help get somebody from where they are to help them find a way to get where they're trying to go. When you have alignment, just like in Newton's cradle, when you drop that sphere in from one side and it hits the ball that goes spinning off the other direction, back and forth and back and forth, the kinetic energy that is transferred through those solid objects shows you how energy can be transmitted through people. It's a perfect metaphor for how stories connect people and drive people forward. And then those individual stories drive us forward, back and forth. And we also tell stories from the point of view of our customers. Our customers, our members, those folks in the community that rely on Toastmasters for a number of things, whether they're a corporate club, whether they're a private club, whether they're a community club, whatever it is, those stories that we tell from that point of view give that organization, that group, more meaning. It's just like back when we were in caves and we were telling stories to our fellow kin who were living with us in a cave to help us understand what happened on the hunt that day, where to avoid the saber-toothed tiger, but where to find the woolly mammoth. From the point of view of others, connects others to us and gives us meaning within our stories. So there's lots of different points of view from which we can tell those stories that help us move forward. In every story, there are a couple of things they all have in common. They all have identifiable characters. Think about every movie you've ever fallen in love with, every book you've ever fallen in love with. You have characters within your life that you can bring to life that are identifiable characters. You give them names, you describe them, you put them in a situation, in a place, you give them height and weight, you give them senses of smell and touch and feel, but you allow your audience to be drawn into those characters. No great story was ever written without fantastic characters. Stories without characters are just an exercise in setting that doesn't help. The characters in your stories are what brings people to life. So as you're weeding out those moments in your life that can become great stories, think about the folks that you were with at the time, that you were invested with, that helped those experiences not just become another day at Epcot, but became a moment in time that you'll cherish forever, and why that moment matters to others. And you bring it to life, not necessarily just through your own point of view, but through the actions and experiences of those that were with you. You need other characters, kind of the tragedy and comedy. You need other characters to help identify the message of your story. And as you're telling this story, there's authentic emotion that comes out. You want individuals to feel what you're feeling. You want to put them there into a situation. This is an image of me the very first winter we lived in Indiana. We moved here in November of 2017, November of 2018. This is January of 2019, during the first polar vortex that I ever experienced. I was miserable. It was cold. When you describe the setting, when you describe the emotion, it helps people connect with you. Those weren't necessarily just tears of humor. I was locked out of our house at the time because I walked outside to take a picture in the snow. My dog jumped on the door and locked the door. I had to call my wife to come home to unlock the door. I had no hat, I had no gloves, and you can't see it from there, but I only was wearing socks. That's a true emotion of coldness, of bitterness, not just bitterness of the bitter cold, but bitterness of why are we not in Florida anymore? How did we end up in Indiana? And wondering if following my wife's career here was the best thing for us. Spoiler alert, it was absolutely the best thing for us, but drawing the emotion out in a setting and in a scene helps characters come to life and helps you tell a story that's relatable to people. Everyone can appreciate what it's like to be cold and lonely and miserable. It happens. Allow people to feel the same emotions that you felt in the stories that you tell in the stories of your life. Give them details. This is me hiking through on an adventure in Hawaii last year. Now, there's a couple specific things about this. One, the shoes I'm wearing are not my shoes because when we went out on the hike, when we got ready to go, our hiking guide said, "Now, I hope you know there's going to be mud." We're like, "Yeah, okay." And he said, "Like up to your knees mud, you might lose your shoes." What do you mean we might lose our shoes? Well, it's rained a lot here in the last few months, especially the last few weeks. And some of the streams we're going to cross are moving pretty quickly. And some of the mud you're going to step in is going to be up to your knees. So we have a collection of shoes that people have left after they've done this adventure, and you're welcome to them. I'm wearing somebody else's shoes. And the other thing you don't know at this point is I was sick as a dog there. We didn't know it until months later, but I had COVID. I had no idea that I had COVID at the time. All I knew was that I had gotten sick on the flight from Indiana to Hawaii. And I spent the week there sick as a dog. And this was the first day that I was out of bed in a week in Hawaii. I don't recommend going to Hawaii and getting COVID. I also don't recommend going to Hawaii and having to spend a week in bed. That was a horrible trip, but it was an incredible adventure along the same time. As we hiked up and down, I did everything I could to make sure that I wasn't the one that was holding the group back. And I certainly didn't want to be the one that ruined my wife's vacation. It was a working trip for her. So during the time that she was working, I was holed up in a bedroom in a hotel, sick as a dog. But as soon as she got back, I made sure that I pulled myself together to try to go do something. I was lucky. I didn't get COVID super bad. I didn't get it nearly as bad as some folks did. I was sick as a dog, but not as sick as some. Stories, when they're told through those specific details, draw people in. You want to give them the detail. What does the mud feel like? What does the cold water feel like? What is the sucking sound that the mud makes when you pull your leg out and it goes pop when your foot comes through and the suction is released? What are the smells? Tropical forests in Hawaii have specific scents that are amazing. How do you describe those? What's wafting through the air? What is in the gentle breeze? And the other thing that you do when you tell stories is you place people in a moment of time. Granted, I lived in Orlando for a long time, and I worked for Walt Disney World, and I worked there during 9/11, and I also worked there at the turn of the century, when we went from 99 to 2000. So I was there for the world's going to end at the turn of the century. It didn't. But by putting people in a specific time, in a specific place, I'm able to tell stories about my experiences that you can remember where you were at that time. Maybe you weren't at Walt Disney World on the night of New Year's Eve, 1999, wondering if we were going to be blacked out at the change of the new year. And fortunate that we weren't. But that moment in time, where were you? Draw people in through time. Time and emotions and experiences all help us connect through stories. All of those stories matter. All of those ways we tell stories help make our stories more important. So how do we tell those stories? Well, there's a couple of famous ways, and I think one of the best ways is the Pixar pitch. Every Pixar movie follows a specific trajectory. Everyone follows a specific pattern. They all start telling, once upon a time, there was this. And every day, this thing happened. One day, it changed. One day, this other thing happened. And because of that, the story went off in this direction. Something changed. And because of that change, something else changed. Until finally, we all came together for a happy ending. You get that same flow, whether you're talking about A Bug's Life, whether you're talking about The Invincibles, whether you're talking about Monsters, Inc., whether you're talking about Buzz Lightyear or Ants or A Bug's Life. All stories told through Pixar are told the same way. Once upon a time, there was. Every day, this thing happened until one day it all changed. Because of that, this other thing changed. Because of that, we went off in this other direction until finally we learned a lesson. When you follow the Pixar pitch, you're able to encapsulate a format to help gauge your story, to give yourself characters, to give yourself specific locations and places, to help draw people into your message so that the story you tell resonates with the individuals with whom you're telling. Pixar pitch is powerful. That's why every one of those movies works out so well. And when you think about it, it's told in another way. The Pixar pitch really comes down to the way it was, a tipping point that changed everything until we move to the way it is. So we're taking people on a journey from how it was, what was the tipping point, the way it is. When I first joined Toastmasters, I was coming off of a 21-year corporate career where I had spent the last decade as a director of human resources, both for Bloomingdale's and then for IKEA. And I loved my career as a director of HR. I got to go open stores all around the country. I got to travel to other countries. I got to travel to Sweden. I loved my job in so many ways, but eventually it came to an end. And when I lost my job at IKEA during the first Great Recession of the 20th century, 21st century, I realized that I had confused who I was with what I did. And when I walked away from corporate America, I didn't know who I was, and I was floundering magnificently. I was like a fish out of water. I didn't have this business card anymore that I could refer to say, this is who I am. And when asked that question, so what do you do? Who are you? I couldn't answer. My tipping point came when I walked into a Toastmasters club and found a group of individuals more focused on engaging others and helping others and learning through the process of walking with somebody in their journey. That investment allowed me to find my voice and my passion, which ended up becoming to walking with others in their journey. I would have never found that passion had I not walked into Toastmasters that day. The way it is in my journey, I would not have become a district officer if it wasn't for that first walk through that meeting. Granted, I wouldn't have been in Toastmasters, and we get that. but I wouldn't have done anything to help the many in their own personal struggles, their own personal journeys to where they're trying to go, to help people uncover who they are as people, what their potential is, to be a lamplighter as a leader for others to help them go forward. That wouldn't be part of my journey. I wouldn't have written a book. I wouldn't have started a business. I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't walked into that Toastmasters group. I look back to that previous life, not with awe, but with appreciation of the lessons I learned that I'm still able to carry forward into my current life and to where I hope that it takes me in the future. But that tipping point of finding Toastmasters, and in particular, that warm embrace I got from Denny and Denise Ward, Jeremy Udell, Michelle Dettlaff, Thomas Blake, those people that just encapsulated what Toastmasters is, that gave me this warm embrace, drew me in. That is the tipping point. When you tell stories of where it was, what you did, and how you learned, it takes people on an arc, and that arc shows growth. Stories need growth to be able to land. There's a power in making lists also. And the lists that I mean about are sometimes you need to sit down and write out, what are the stories that you tell? Why do you tell them? What are the things that have happened in your life that really matter? What are the stories you go to on a regular basis? And what are the stories that you wish you could tell better? Start making lists of those moments that when you walk away, or when you're in that moment, you think, this would be a great story to tell someone. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm struggling, I'm frustrated. What are the stories that you tell? Create lists, almost like a journal of stories to tell, of vignettes to be able to use, and then practice weaving them into stories. But you need to start somewhere, and that somewhere, before you can go on the Pixar pitch, before you can start that story arc, is to figure out what stories to tell. Start by creating lists of the moments in your life that are story worthy. There's some specific lists I think that really help do this. 10 things that I want to learn, 10 things that I have learned, whether it's as a Rotarian, whether it's as a Toastmaster, whatever it might be. Start making things that you have learned, that you have done, that you have experienced. And those will become different types of experience of draw out your stories. There's other lists you can make as well. These are lists that will help you identify different things to tell in your story, or stories to formulate. What are the words and phrases that describe you as a person? Why would people say that? Why would you say that about yourself? What are 10 moments that shaped you as a person? What are 10 obsessions you have, 10 goals you have? These 11 articles of these 11 items here on this list, these are all wonderful possibilities to draw something out that you may have forgotten about, and that you may need to go back and ask questions to others to help you be able to formulate as a story to tell. Stories are powerful, but they don't come by accident. They come on purpose. Lists help you identify the stories that you want to tell and the stories that matter within your journey, within your life. Sometimes you need prompts to be able to find those stories. And by prompts, what I mean are those artifacts, those physical things that happen that remind you of something. Have you ever walked past something in your house and just remembered, I know where that's from. I remember being there. I remember doing that thing. One of the things that always gets me is whenever I open my closet door and I see that giant trophy sitting in there from winning my first district contest, the first time that I won the district title in District 84 for speech evaluation, I remembered not just of winning the contest, but I remembered of the struggle to get there, of the 6 second and third place finishes along the way, of the people that helped me, and of the journey that year, because Jeremy and I worked together from different divisions to try to meet in the finals, to compete each other in the finals that year. And that experience changed me tremendously as a person and as a Toastmaster. So what are the prompts within your life? What are the things that you look at that say, oh yeah, that is a good story? I have softball bats in the garage because my wife and I still play slow pitch softball. So there are stories I'm reminded of when I see that prompt. There are stories I'm reminded of when I walk in and see a white light on my computer that I'm talking to, because I know that at some point this became normal And at some point, I'm going to have to get used to being around people again. So what are the prompts and what stories did those prompts remind you to tell? They're artifacts of your life. Those artifacts matter. But it's not just artifacts. Sometimes you need prompts in the form of a sentence that you can start creating stories. You can start remembering the stories to tell by following along specific structure. Things like, I really wish I had said yes when, what was that moment? When everyone else is doing this, I'm doing this. I'm petrified to what? Maybe it's to do something, maybe it's to try something, maybe it's to think something, maybe it's to eat something. If you could go back in time, what would you do differently? How did you become a fan of the thing you became a fan of most? I'm a huge fan of 80s music. I love 80s alternative and new wave music. I love shoegaze. I love goth. I love synth. I love new wave. I love new wave music. I love punk. But there are stories about how I got to those places in my life and why all of those things still resonate with me because of the stories about how I got there. They remind me of specific things. Prompts help you uncover what you may have forgotten about. So these are 11 good ideas for prompts to consider writing down and consider trying on your own to find your story, because within each one of these prompts is a specific story for you to tell. And maybe it's a story that you tell about Toastmasters. Maybe it's a story you tell about your family. Maybe it's a story you tell about your faith, your friends. It could be a story about anything. Your passions, your desires, your quirks, all of them are great places to find stories. They make you human. They help you connect with your audience. So consider prompts. Consider working through questions like this to help you find the stories that you want to tell. And sometimes there are just specific nouns that you can look at to help you uncover a specific story. Now, there are some really powerful ones I think that a lot of people share. When you think about kids, maybe it's when you were a kid, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's wanting to have kids. But what are the stories about kids that you like? Maybe your stories about kids are about the time that you went and found baby goats. I don't know what kids means to you, but I'm sure you have a story about kids out there somewhere. Places you live, places you go, places you like, places you want to go. What are the cars you've driven, the cars you want to drive? What do you hope from future cars? Where have you lived? Where have you vacationed? Who have you worked for? Who were leaders, who were managers, and who were bosses? And those are three different things. Think about the nouns that resonate with you most. This is a great starting point for using nouns to uncover stories within your life. And all of these stories, when worked on and created, can help you become a little bit more effective in connecting with other people. Nouns are powerful because they give you a blank page. All of these ideas, whether they're a list, whether they're a noun, whether they're an artifact, whether there's something you remember, whether it's somebody who helps you uncover, it's all coming back to you have the ability to write the next chapter in your life. In every story that was ever written, there was a point where the author sat down, put pen to paper on a blank page, and created a masterpiece. Now, maybe you're not going to write your story. Maybe you're just going to tell your story. But you have the opportunity, as you uncover the stories of your life, to create and tell the masterpiece that is your experience. Because nobody else will ever have your experience. They might do similar things, but they're never going to do them through your lens of your experiences, of your background, of your values, of your education, of you. We all have a blank page. And maybe the story we've told up to this point has been told through a specific point of view, but when you turn that page and it's blank in front of you, that blank page gives you license to write a new story, to tell a new story, start a new chapter. Blank pages are powerful as long as you figure out what you want to put on those pages. I tell this a lot because we have the opportunity to connect with others. So one of the ways that we can connect is through Rotary. We can connect through Toastmasters. We can use storytelling to help create new relationships through new experiences. Maybe these are stories you can go and practice in your club. Maybe these are stories you can go out and practice and connect with a Rotary club near you. Maybe they're stories you can go out and connect with your employees, with your bosses, with somebody in the community, with your church, with a civic organization, whatever it is. Stories connect people to each other. So we hope that tonight you learned a little bit about what stories are, why telling them matters. Just like everything else in life, storytelling is a skill. You may not be the most gifted storyteller today, but as you work through these processes, maybe you'll be the most gifted storyteller tomorrow. Maybe some of these things you're better at than others. Maybe you're great at telling the story with setting, but not with character. And that's where you want to focus on, is how to develop better characters. Maybe you want to practice telling stories, not through location or character, but by having a specific reason, but by not just telling a story to entertain, but telling a story to educate, or telling a story to elucidate. How you use storytelling is up to you. We as Toastmasters, you as district leaders, you as club officers, we all have the ability to impact those members in our club, the officers in our club, all of our peers that are out there in District 11, all of our peers that are out there in Toastmasters. Our stories are powerful examples of what we've gone through, what we aspire to become. Use stories, practice telling them, practice uncovering them. Use the Pixar pitch. And maybe, just maybe, down the road, you will find that the story that you tell to someone else inspires them to turn the page and start a new chapter in their life and their journey. And by walking with them, you get to uncover a new chapter in your story. So I hope this helps you a little bit. I hope this is entertaining and educational for you. I am a huge proponent of storytelling. I want you to practice telling your story to your audience, to finding a new audience. I want you to become a better storyteller. Storytelling is leadership. Toastmasters is not where speeches were made. It's where leaders are made. And leaders are made not necessarily just through facts, but they're made by connecting through stories. So I hope this helps you become just a little bit of a better storyteller. And maybe tomorrow, the story you tell will change someone's life. So until we meet again, I wish you well. I hope you have a wonderful night. And as always, my friends, toast on, everyone. Toast on. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to coming to you again for another edition of whatever these educational systems have evolved into. It's almost like a podcast now, but they're fun to do. So if you have a suggestion for what you want to hear about, maybe you even want to do one of these, let me know. We can definitely give you a platform. Have a wonderful night. Be well. Tell a story. Become a better leader. Connect with your clubs. Connect with your audience, and they will follow you to wherever you go. Be well, everyone. Have a good night. Toast on.